No deeply held, rigid opinion is ever truly about the external facts. It's always about the internal fear that the holder is desperately trying to manage. We spend our lives arguing about the world above the surface, like the politics, the policies, the personalities. But the source of our passion, the driving force, if you will, behind our intensity, is often the anxiety that's bubbling from below the surface. Every sharp conviction that we deploy in debate, every fact that we wield with precision like a weapon, it's really just a sophisticated defense mechanism, I would say, protecting the very core, and that's our vulnerable fear. The fear of being excluded, the fear of being wrong, the fear of being powerless, the simple crushing fear of just being alone. Welcome back to Uber Bintegers. Here, our mission is to relentlessly pull back ourselves into alignment and connection with ourselves and each other. We want to achieve this by standing on these two foundational truths, and that's integrity and intimacy. Now, integrity is about telling the truth, first to ourselves and then to the world around us. It is the alignment of internal values and our external actions, right? And when we find fear beneath the opinions that we hold, and when we address it, that's when we begin to restore integrity. Now, intimacy is simply defined as intimacy. It is the courage to be truly known, to be truly witnessed in our unfiltered self without needing to debate or negotiate for our existence. And when we name the fear inside, we're creating space for intimacy. Today, in our episode, we're diving below the surface of our arguments to expose the real emotional drivers that lead to such devastating polarization in our culture. Now, the fear beneath the opinion, I would say, is often a direct result of past experiences where, or perhaps we were met with shame or disapproval for being uncertain, right? For being vulnerable, or simply for not even knowing the answer. For many of us, especially men, we learned very early on that the performance of certainty was the fastest, it was the fastest path to acceptance, right? Or to respect, or even to safety. So if you could speak with confidence, if you could dominate a fact, you then avoided this terrifying emotional risk of being seen as foolish or incompetent. And so we built an entire identity, a performance identity around our opinions. Our beliefs are not just ideas, they are like our emotional armor. They're the shield that prevents the external world from accessing our internal anxiety. I mean, think about the relatable experience of being confronted with a position that you cannot immediately dismantle, right? You 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 don't just feel intellectually challenged, you feel also like this sudden internal shift, right? A tightness, a rush of heat perhaps, or a surge of panic that is not your logical part of your brain firing, right? That's your worth defense system going back online, and the fear now is rising. So the opinion protects us from the fear of being excluded. If we hold the right opinion, if we maybe belong to the right group, then we avoid the pain of being cast out or of being lonely. Now, the opinion protects us from the fear of change, right? Changing our minds means admitting that our past stance was wrong, which feels kind of like admitting that our past self was foolish, right? And we prefer the rigid comfort of consistency, even if it's incorrect. Now, the opinion protects us from the fear of chaos as well. Like certainty, like however fragile it is, it gives us this sense, if you will, of control in a world that is overwhelming and unpredictable. And so we use our opinion as a mental anchor in the storm of modern life. Now, the opinion is also like a statement of fact, right? But it isn't. It is a statement of how I need to feel safe right now in this moment. The intensity, if you will, of this opinion is really a direct measure of the intensity of the fear that we're really trying to suppress. Now, when fear is the driving force, integrity is often the first casualty, right? See, integrity requires us to tell the truth, first to ourselves, but then when we are terrified, we're not really looking for truth anymore. We're actually just looking for a place to hide out. So when we feel the panic of potential exclusion, we quickly adopt this extreme opinion of the group around us that we want to belong to. And so we stop asking questions like, what do I actually believe? And instead we start asking, what do I need to believe to stay here? This is the profound act of self-betrayal. Here we are silencing the small, nuanced voice of our inner truth, because the loud collective voice of the group is what's promising safety. We're in essence sacrificing truth alignment inside for group acceptance. And this creates this emotional numbness and an internal kind of a fracture that leads to misery, I would say. And so we become a walking performance, reciting slogans and defending positions, and these don't even actually resonate with our core values. They just avoid the anxiety, if you will, of standing alone. This is the deep cost of polarization. It's not just that we disagree with others, it is that we are constantly disagreeing with ourselves in order to belong. And then we turn ourselves into these cheap imitations of what truly conviction-driven people look like. And the result is this massive loneliness that we see basically everywhere, where we're surrounded by people who agree with us, but they do that because we're all wearing masks of certainty. And no one in this space ever gets to know the real and complex person that's underneath. So we're in essence connecting mask to mask instead of from heart to heart. Now, the presence of unacknowledged fear fundamentally, I think, changes the nature of our conversations. They turn these conversations like from potential moments of what connection could look like into loyalty tests. And this, in essence, just destroys intimacy, right? Intimacy, like we described earlier, is intimacy. And this requires a high degree of emotional security. It requires us to trust that if we reveal our doubts or our complexity, that we will not be punished. But when we are operating from fear, our opinions are not invitations anymore. They're barriers. And we're not really asking for understanding. We're demanding compliance now. See, when the fear beneath the opinion is the fear of being excluded, any conversation that challenges that opinion, in essence, feels like this existential threat to our sense of belonging. The other person is not seen now as a partner in truth. They're seen as a rival, trying to pull us out of this emotional security of the group that we're part of. And instead of instead of relational courage that's required for intimacy, we deploy this argument addiction now, right? We relentlessly we attack the other person's position because we perceive their difference as a threat to our safety. And the moment that we feel our emotional security is challenged, it's here I think that we stop listening and start reloading instead. I mean, think about the feeling when someone challenges your deepest conviction. If your foundation is fear, your experience is almost immediate, right? It's this physical wave of anxiety and anger, perhaps. And the anger is just fear with a megaphone. And we use outrage often to push that threat away. I think this is why we often retreat into silence. The silence that follows a really highly charged debate is not safety. That's isolation. We withdraw because the emotional cost of being wrong, the fear of being exposed and alone, is too high. We cannot build intimacy in a space where one person's opinion is viewed as a threat to the other person's sense of self-worth. So intimacy requires us to make the other person safe, and then we can't do that, however, until we make ourselves safe by dealing with that underlying fear, right? See, we can only begin to heal the polarization that when we realize that the solution is not better facts as much as in more courageousness, a greater sense of courage. We must have that courage to face the fear that is driving the argument inside us, right? This, I would say, this is the healing process that involves two core shifts, right? So on the one hand, it's the truth alignment or integrity. When we feel that familiar urge to argue, we must interrupt the flow of certainty and ask the essential question of, what is the fear beneath this feeling right now? Am I afraid of being seen as ignorant, perhaps? Or am I afraid of losing access to my friends or my community if I concede this point? Am I afraid that if I'm wrong, I will have to fundamentally change my life? See, by naming the fear, we're bringing it into the light. And then we decouple the fear from the opinion. So then the fear loses its power to manipulate our actions. And then we're no longer now having to defend like a rigid idea. We're simply recognizing that there's an internal emotional state, right? So this act of self-honesty, or telling the truth to ourselves, is one of the highest forms of integrity, I would say. This is where we build genuine emotional sovereignty, the freedom to feel fear without allowing that fear to dictate our performance. And then the second shift is the relational courage or intimacy. So once we're able to name that fear internally, we can now make an honest shift or an honest move towards connection. And this is the first step toward the other person. So we move now from argument over here to vulnerability. And we risk being seen as complex and as messy and in the midst of our humanity. And we risk the profound courage of saying, I'm realizing that I've been maybe arguing this point so hard because genuinely I'm afraid that something would happen if the opposing perspective took hold. Can we talk about this fear that I'm feeling instead of the facts that we're trying to explore? Or you could say, my stance on this really comes from a really old wounds that I have on the inside. I got burned years ago for saying the wrong thing, and I'm still recovering. Can you just see this part of me again for a second? And then when we do this, we're now transforming that conversation from a loyalty test into an act of true intimacy. We're asking the other person to see into our core, into the very source of our intensity. And then we're now trading the fragile security of being certain for this unshakable security of being true. I think this is the only way to heal the addiction and the loneliness that it creates. We stop using opinions as this emotional armor, and now we start using honesty as a bridge, if you will. We prove that we can actually disappoint without disappearing, and that our worth is not conditional on our correctness. I think we must redefine manhood by demonstrating that the bravest and most courageous thing we can do is to stay honest when the moment tempts us to posture. And it's only here that we can step out of the shadow, if you will, of our fear and into the light of what connection looks like. In tomorrow's episode, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the groups and the structures that we form to keep these fears at bay in echo chambers, if you will, right? And that title for tomorrow's is Echo Chambers as Emotional Armor. Yeah, that's tomorrow's episode. I hope you'll join me for that one. But in the meantime, thank you for listening to this point, and drop me a comment down below. I would love to hear how today's episode landed for you. I'll see you tomorrow.